Samson looked up, trying to see through the smoke. A breeze whispered through, it might have been a wash from Baron's Landing, and drew aside the curtain of smoke. Cruz's enforcer waded out into the tree line behind the marauder and raised both arms. The big laser fired first, striking the marauder square in the back. Samson saw the reflected light as the armor exploded away. Then the enforcer's right arm came into line and bucked as the LB-10X cannon fired. Sparks flashed across the Marauder 2C's frame as the submunition sanded armor from the Jade Falcon mech. It slowed, twisting in place to bring one arm to bear on Cruz's mech. Thus It Shall Stand, page 67 by Jason Schmetzer. BattleTech, 25 Years of Art and Fiction. The origins of the Enforcer have an air of mystery to them. Though this 50-ton brawler would become the mainstay of the armed forces of the Federated Suns over the course of the Succession Wars, the original designers of this machine are harder to pin down. The most descriptive explanation is that the designers at Achenar Battlemechs on New Avalon were digging around in the company's archives when they stumbled upon the plans for a medium battlemech that featured a large autocannon in the machine's right arm. Leaning into the cliché about Davions being fans of ballistic weaponry, the battlemech was rushed into production. By 2777, the first ENF-4Rs were stomping off the assembly lines on New Avalon. As it turned out, this would be fortuitous for the Federated Suns, as the Ameris Civil War would end just 2 years later, and by 2781, the Star League's High Council of Lords met for the last time. The stage was set for a conflict that would threaten to bring interstellar human civilization to the brink of collapse, and the only way to survive was for House Davion to rapidly bring new and powerful weapons to the table as quickly as possible. Just a decade after the first Enforcer was shipped to the units of the AFFS, the Draconis Combine launched their invasion of the Federated Suns. More than 300 years after the mech's first construction, two things remain true. The Combine is a constant threat, and the Enforcer is a crucial tool to hold back that dragon. Harley twisted in his command seat, using the joystick to bring his targeting reticle on the pirate dervish racing toward the dropships. Ignoring the moderate risk of heat buildup, he let go with his autocannon and large laser, triggering both target interlocks at the same time. At his side, Bix and Fox both locked on the lumbering thug and gave it a taste of their savage weaponry. The autocannon round missed the running dervish, but not the laser. It hit the damaged right arm, slicing through the thin, carbon-scarred armor plating and digging deep into the arm. By Blood Betrayed, page 146 through 147, by Blaine Lee Pardoe. Constructed from a Darwinian standard chassis wrapped around a Nissan 200 Fusion engine, the ENF-4R Enforcer was not built for speed, but for strength and firepower. With a top run speed of just 64 km per hour, the Enforcer's agility was improved with the addition of 4 McLeod Specials jump jets, which allowed the mech to leap up to 120 meters. This 464 movement profile would serve the Enforcer well in the coming centuries of conflict. The mech's 9 tons of Star Shield standard plate armor served it well, and it was roughly comparable to the other 50-ton battlemechs like the Centurion 9A, which had 8.5 tons, and the Griffin 1N, which carried 9.5. Once the superfluous and unneeded things like a cockpit, life support, gyro, and targeting and tracking systems were added, that left the Enforcer with 14 tons of mass to play with for weapons and gear. Naturally, the Achenar design team determined the best possible use was to slap a Federated AC-10 autocannon on it along with 1 ton of ammunition, and then go have an early lunch. When they got back, they realized they still had a few tons to play with, so they added a Chiscomp 43 large laser to the left arm and a Chiscomp 32 small laser to the left torso. Like so many Succession Wars battlemechs, the mech did have its issues. That single ton of ammunition for the AC-10 autocannon was a significant constraint on the Enforcer's damage output over time. The Mechwarrior had to be careful with his or her shots to make each one count. Once the ammunition bin ran dry, having to rely upon a single large laser and a short-range laser at an extremely close range wasn't attractive. Additionally, the lack of hand actuators in either arm limited the mech's utility in climbing and picking up items in non-combat situations. On the bright side, with 12 single heat sinks, the 4R was tough to overheat in general use conditions. Firing both the AC-10 and the large laser while on the run left the mech at just 1+ heat into the red, so you could make it a considerable way into a brawl before needing to hold back. At Dunkeld Spaceport's main gate, Lieutenant Darlene Lucci held her hand up as the tall, angular shape of the 50-ton Enforcer strode across the compound, its autocannon blazing away at Lieutenant Bergstrom's retreating Valkyrie just outside the perimeter fence. Behind her, the other members of First Squad waited, silent, motionless, almost invisible amid the rubble of the gatehouse. Blood of Heroes, page 207, by Andrew Keith. When I say that the Enforcers saw widespread deployment across the armed forces of the Federated Suns, that understates just how common the mech was throughout the Succession Wars. The mech was represented in every major conflict and most of the notable battles fought by the AFFS. It would have been incredibly odd to have a battle mech battalion without at least one Enforcer in their ranks. During an offensive on the Combine planet Capra during the First Succession War, the 2nd Crucis Lancers deployed lances of Enforcers that trained to work together to concentrate their autocannon fire on targets to quickly burn them down. Because of course, if one AC-10 autocannon is nice, then 4 must be better. The battle lifted a certain Lieutenant Cyril Sombelheim to fame and perhaps infamy after she encouraged Oliver Enforcer Lance to fire until their cannons glowed, if need be, until they explode. Unfortunately for the lieutenant, her autocannon suffered a heat-related rapid disassembly event, and she was killed in the explosion. FA-FO, I suppose. During the Succession War assault on the longtime Combine world of Tanil, Mechwarriors piloting Enforcers were the vanguard of the AFFS units dropped to the surface to create a beachhead. They were successful in holding that established perimeter while the main assault force landed before moving with that force toward the mission objective. The Ranger's only barrel-chested Ostrock used one of its large lasers to strip all but the last bit of armor from the first Peregrine's right arm. The Ostrock's other large laser combined with fire from the Ranger Enforcer's large laser to disintegrate all of the armor over the center of the Peregrine's chest and melt some of the internal supports found there. Then the Enforcer launched an autocannon shot, scouring the armor from the left side of the Peregrine's chest and leaving the mech even more vulnerable to a second strike. Malicious Intent, page 173 through 174, by Michael A. Stackpole. Even with its success, the designers at Achenar were quick to note and attempt to deal with the flaws in the design. The most pressing and dangerous was that single ton of AC-10 ammunition, which simply wasn't enough to keep the mech combat effective through most engagements. The least intrusive solution was to remove the small laser and presumably a half-ton of armor to make room for a second ton of autocannon ammunition. Unfortunately, attempts to modify the frame of the Enforcer introduced gremlins into the system that added additional complications. Linkages and the physical orientation of the second ammunition bin, running from the left torso to the right arm, proved to be complicated and temperamental. Under testing, the feed was prone to jamming, and it ran perilously close to the armor of the Enforcer's back. Even grazing or light hits to the back armor could result in a complete jam of the system. Ultimately, an entire rework of the BattleMech's internal systems was called for, but the pressing concerns of the fighting against the Combine and the Capellans prevented any delay in Enforcer production. The mech would see an update, but not for quite some time. But as bad as that cursed clan tech is, the gap is getting smaller. This new gear is not as good as theirs, but it takes the edge off. We know a lot more about how they fight now too, and we've seen that they're not invincible. Unorthodox tactics can beat them, and you don't get much more unorthodox than McKinnon's Raiders. From the Journal of Daniel Whalen, 3051, The Sword and Dragon Sourcebook. The story of our first official variant of the Enforcer starts way back with the collapse of the Star League and Kerensky's exodus from the Inner Sphere, doomed to collapse into the horrors of total war. At least that was Alexander Kerensky's appraisal of the situation. Not too far off, actually. However, not everyone in the SLDF was so pessimistic. For example, Captain Kieran McKinnon, former commander of Fox Company, 2nd Battalion of the 142nd Battle Regiment of the 251st Battle Mech Division of the SLDF. When McKinnon received word of Kerensky's plan to leave the Inner Sphere for an unknown destination, he wrote to the general and shared his concerns. He pointed out that the SLDF was the only entity with the power to keep the houses in check. Ultimately, he made the choice not to join the Exodus. McKinnon's unit officially allied with House Davion and became the 7th Crucis Lancers, a semi-autonomous unit based out of Kentaris 4. Sometimes known as McKinnon's Raiders or the Fox's Teeth, this unit fought their way through the Succession Wars and built a solid reputation as a formidable force. This is relevant to our discussion of the Enforcer because a Fox's Teeth sergeant named Daniel Whalen became well known not only for his own antics as a periphery-born mech warrior, but also his ENF-4R Enforcer, which was modified with cutting-edge technology as of the late 3040s. It was thanks to the close political ties that the Fox's Teeth had with House Davion. The early Helm Memory Core upgrades had to go to someone, so they might as well go to one of your premier fighting units. The Daniel variant of the Enforcer benefited from an upgraded 250 XL fusion engine, double heatsinks, and 9 tons of ferrofibrous armor, which slightly boosted the mech's overall armor protection and saved 6 tons of mass for use elsewhere. This specific machine was originally constructed on New Avalon in 3019, but had suffered significant damage in combat on Harrow's Sun before receiving its upgrades. When Wayland joined the Fox's Teeth, he was assigned to this rebuilt marvel of Helm Core goodies. The traditional autocannon was replaced by a brand new NAIS Mark I prototype Gauss rifle in the right arm, along with 3 tons of ammunition stored in the right torso. At mid-range, 2 Chiscomp 39 ER medium lasers in the left arm could come into play, and finally a Chiscomp 32 ER small laser was added to the left torso, because it's always better to have an emotional support small laser and not need it than need one and not have it. Case was added to the right torso, but not to protect the inert Gauss rifle ammunition, but to protect the mech warrior from the Gauss rifle itself should the capacitor be hit during battle. Overall, the Daniel refit of the Enforcer was a dangerous machine. With its 5.85 movement profile and that Gauss rifle with 24 rounds of ammunition, Daniel Whalen could consistently be an annoyance to his foes. The historical records support this, as he survived well into the 3050s and served with distinction during the FedCom Civil War. A harsh gust of wind heralded the arrival of hail. It hammered at her Argus, knocking almost a half-ton of armor off her left leg, her right arm, and all across her chest. What the hell, she thought, checking her monitors to the wail of shrill alarms. She had been in some devastating storms before, but never one with hail that could penetrate aligned crystal steel. She was about to report this new development to the rest of her lance when a proximity alarm sounded. Jerking backward, she began to pivot her upper torso even as a cascade of brilliant ruby energy poured into her mech's right side. The large laser easily sublimated her armor, leaving a metal cloud that created even more confusion as a vortex of wind trapped it briefly near her Argus. As she lined up her own weapons, she cursed herself for a fool. The Enforcer had practically announced himself with a cluster shot, and she'd stood out in the open begging for more. Imminent Crisis, page 112 through 113 by Randall N. Bills. By the time that the Helm Memory Core variant of the Enforcer went into production both for Achenar Battlemechs and Callan Weapon Industries, the Inner Sphere was a very different place. The attempted fusion between the Lyran Commonwealth and the Federated Suns was well underway, and everyone was facing the new threat of the clans gobbling up worlds faster than they could be reinforced. Huge numbers of resources were being dumped into updating existing battlemech designs to somehow give them a chance in the face of this new threat. The ENF-5D Enforcer was just one of the results of these efforts. With auspicious goals of creating a stronger, faster, and more powerful Enforcer, the design team spared little expense in implementing new technologies. Though the frame remained standard, the engine was upgraded to a Nissan 250 XL Fusion engine, which pushed the mech's top speed up to 86.4 km per hour. It also allowed for the addition of a 5th jump jet, which pushed the mech's movement profile to 5.85. 9 tons of Starguard ferrofibrous armor provided 161 points of protection, which was nearly a 12% increase over the original 4R. Not too shabby. Unfortunately, the one upgrade that was left off was the heatsinks, which remained at just 12 standard. Spoilers, this will come back to haunt us later. As far as weapons go, there aren't any surprises, as you've seen a memory core upgrade before. The AC-10 autocannon was upgraded to the Mydron XL LB-10X autocannon, which was both lighter and offered the ability to use both scattershot and standard ammunition. Thankfully, the long-time ammunition supply concerns were addressed with a second ton of ammunition added to the right torso along with case. While it wouldn't save the mech from destruction thanks to the presence of the XL engine, it would save the Mechwarrior should either of the ammunition bins suffer a critical hit. The more controversial upgrade for the 5D Enforcer was the installation of the Blazefire Sweet Shot Extended Range Large Laser in the left arm. As it is unfortunately so often the case with the Helm memory core upgrades, the ER Large Laser is added with a complete disregard to the consequences for a mech's heat-sinking capability. Thankfully, the standard small laser in the left torso was left alone. Thank Kerensky for small blessings. The heat management on the Enforcer 5D is a bit of a mess. There's no way to use the ER Large Laser besides standing still and not firing anything else that won't result in extra heat. The more typical shot on the run with the LB-10X in the mix left the mech with 4+ into the red. If the jump jets came into play, most of the time the Mechwarrior would need to hold off on the ER Large Laser to prevent serious overheating issues. No matter how you slice it, the heat generated by that ER Large Laser undermines the effort to make the mech more powerful and agile. Unfortunately, between the 4R and the 5D, the addition of the ER Large Laser replaces one critical flaw with another. Still, production went ahead at both the Achenar and Callan production lines. It was prophesized that the Enforcer would continue to play a major role in the military units of the Federated Commonwealth. By late 3050, the first Enforcer 5Ds were being shipped to units across the domain, and an order from the AFFC secured a full 10 years of production runs from both manufacturers. The early beneficiaries of these 5D runs were the Lyran Royal Guards, Davion Brigade of Guards, and the FedCom Corps. There was so much demand that Defiance Industries was given plans for the Enforcer so that they could produce the mech on Hesperus 2. As Clan Jade Falcon continued to grind into Lyran space, resources were taxed and logistics lines stretched beyond capacity. Even with the production lines running at full speed across the Federated Commonwealth, there were just always more requests than stock of mechs on hand. This pressure turned out to be one of the contributing factors that led to the FedCom Civil War. The Lyrans felt the pressure of direct conflict on their doorstep, and there was resentment that built where they felt like they were bearing the brunt of the fighting while the Fed Sons were safely behind the buffer zone of Combine territory. Alternatively, the people of the Federated Sons felt put upon for constantly being asked to do with less and to sacrifice for a distant conflict that seemingly had no end. When tensions did boil over and the Federated Commonwealth was torn asunder in a brutal civil war, the Enforcer could be found on both sides of the conflict. It's a very big topic that should probably get its own video someday, but I want to focus today on the impact on Talon, a settled and industrialized moon within the Werncase system. It's relevant to our discussion today because Talon was where a significant number of Callan weapons industries production lines were set up. Control of that production, along with the production of dozens of other industrialized worlds, was seen as a key to winning the war for both the Lyran loyalists and the allied Davion forces. Starting in 3063, Lyran forces besieged the defending Davions in an effort to purge them from Talon. Losses to both military and infrastructure were substantial, and over the course of 3 years, much of the Callan factory complex was obliterated. The intense fighting over the control of the industrialized world ended up guaranteeing that neither side would benefit from it following the war's conclusion in April of 3067. An obvious consequence of this destruction and the entire FedCom Civil War was that for quite some time, production of the Enforcer would be limited. In fact, the next official revamp for the design wouldn't arrive until 3142, nearly a century after the 5D's introduction. Now, before you yell at me, part of the reason why there weren't any other Enforcer upgrades during that time was that in 3059, First Prince Victor Steiner Davion ordered the battle mech completely redesigned from the ground up. The resulting battle mech, designated the ENF-6M Enforcer 3, replaced the original on the production lines on Achenar and Callan. Though similar in many ways to the OG Enforcer, I'm making the editorial call to consider it an entirely different design, worthy of its own video someday down the road. Largely because it has its own unique story and there are 10 variants, which would make this video entirely too long. I just want to make sure that it was mentioned so I don't get angry YouTube comments and bags of flaming excrement left on my porch. The future of the original Enforcer looked pretty bleak, and oddly enough, it would be reborn as a result of desperation in what looked like the Federated Sun's darkest hour. Having suffered heavy losses to both manpower and industry thanks to the wildly successful invasion by the Draconis Combine in 3144, the Fed Suns sought out every possible solution to put more bodies and battle mechs onto the field. Situated quite far from the front lines, the recovered Callan Industries production lines on Talon were ramped up to produce a battle mech that was relatively inexpensive and didn't rely upon excessively hard-to-get materials and technology. Designers dusted off the plans for the Enforcer and decided to see what they could do with it. The resulting ENF-5R Enforcer turned out to be a boon for Callan, who could pump them out of their factories at a frantic pace. Durability was the theme for the Enforcer 5R. One of the early challenges was the swap to a comparatively less expensive and vulnerable light fusion engine from the 5D's Extra Light. Unfortunately, it also required using a less powerful 200 rated engine, which dropped the mech's movement profile back to 464. It kept the 9 tons of ferrofibrous armor, and thankfully, our dear Enforcer finally received the upgrade to 10 double heatsinks. As far as weaponry goes, it doesn't stray too far from the original. The LB-10X autocannon retained its spot in the right arm, and its 2 tons of ammunition were given Case 2 to protect both the Mechwarrior and the Mech from devastating ammunition explosions. Backing up the autocannon, a large re-engineered laser was added to the left arm, finally saying goodbye to that pesky ER-large laser. Weighing it at 8 tons, taking up 5 critical locations and generating 9 heat per shot for 9 damage, the large re-engineered laser benefited from being able to treat hardened ferrolamellar and laser-reflective armor as if they were standard armor for applying damage. They also benefit from a -1 accuracy boost. It shares a similar, though slightly shorter range profile as the LB-10X, so they make a pretty good match for dual primary weapons. Finally, because it wouldn't feel right without one, an emotional support ER small laser was added to the left torso, completing the Spartan yet useful build. Overall, the Enforcer 5R wasn't going to win any awards for DPS generation or speed, but what it lacked in those flashy bits was a thoroughly utilitarian battle mech that could be useful in a wide variety of battlefield conditions. Fans of the channel know I love a good generalist battle mech, and that ENF-5R pushes all of my buttons. Sure, it isn't perfect, but dang, is it a useful little brawling medium mech. If the Federated Suns want to completely reclaim everything they've lost to the Combine, it'll be done in the dirt and grime, where a mech like the Enforcer 5R will prevail over fussier and more delicate designs. She flashed on a humanoid mech, painted black with a touch of shocking blue, the colors of Fushida's Fusiliers. The mech's hands ended in gun barrels rather than hands, probably an Enforcer. She watched the medium mech raise its right arm just as the autocannon fire hammered into her chest, knocking her backwards. She took a step back to keep from falling and fired a pair of lasers at the pirate. A Bitter Taste of Hope, page 48, by Stephen Mohan Jr., Battlecore, The Red Kopesh. Of course, my unrestrained hubris and ego couldn't let this mech go without an attempt to create a totally unofficial and non-canon 1MF variant just for fun. I think I've managed to cobble something together that is as fun as it is unsurprising for those of you who have seen my content before. Behold the Enforcer 1MF. Taking advantage of as much mass-saving technology as possible, I started with Endosteel, added 10 tons of light ferrofibrous armor, and installed a 250 light fusion engine to strike a balance between speed and vulnerability in those side torsos. The 5 jump jets maintain the 585 movement profile from the 5D. The last non-weapon structural addition was 13 double heatsinks. As far as weapons go, I'm departing a bit from tradition with the installation of a plasma rifle in the right arm. I know, heresy. But technically it is firing a projectile, so maybe it is sort of a ballistics weapon? No? Okay, let's just move on. The rifle was fed by 2 tons of ammunition stored in the right torso to add some more criticals near that light engine. Backing up the plasma rifle was a snub-nosed PPC in the left arm, which is a good pick as its range profile largely mimics that of the plasma. At 9 hexes, the plasma rifle is in medium range and that snub-nosed PPC is at short, so that and closer is where the 1MF is going to want to be to maximize the PPC damage and accuracy. To further encourage that sort of close-range conflict resolution, a pair of ER small lasers were added to the mech, one in the head and one in the left torso. Finally, to boost the mech's resiliency a little bit more, an anti-missile system was added to the right torso along with its 1 ton of ammunition. The heat profile for the Enforcer 1MF is forgiving, as the 13 double heat sinks can handle a full alpha strike while on the run, only generating excess heat if the anti-missile system kicks in as well that turn. The overall damage potential in the preferred 1 to 9 hex range is either 20 or 26 depending upon if you bring those ER small lasers into play. Add in the 1d6 heat from the plasma rifle on targets with heat sinks or the additional damage to non-heat sinked enemies and it's not too shabby. Sure, the Hunchback could do better, but it's not as rough and tumble as this Enforcer and it doesn't have that agility. I'm curious what you think. If you want to give the Enforcer 1MF a try, I've included the record sheet for it in a Dropbox link in the video notes below. So why do we love the Enforcer? The answer to this question might depend upon how loyal you are to House Davion. For those of you who live and breathe the Federated Suns, the Enforcer is a staple battle mech that is useful in a wide variety of situations while not being too hard on the pocketbook. For everyone else, it's a generalist 50-tonner, which might not get as much press as some of the others in a very crowded field of popular medium mechs, but it will rarely let you down in a pinch. What the Enforcer lacks in a long list of variants, the mech makes up for with charm. Just look at that face. Is that not the most adorable little visage? The mech's fluff is solid, and clearly the AFFS likes it as it inspired more than a few other battle mech designs, including the Watchman, Sentry, and of course its cousin, the Enforcer 3. What do you think? Is the Enforcer a mech you'd pick to fit a medium slot in a Lance, or are there just too many other better options? Let me know in the comments and we'll keep the discussion going. Thank you as always for coming out today to play in the BattleTech universe. It's been a wonderful year for the channel, and looking down the road, I'm excited to help keep it going well into 2025 with your support. If my mathing is correct, by the time this video goes live, the channel should be very close to crossing over that 20,000 subscriber mark, which is 2,000 more than I had hoped to reach by the end of the year. I still cannot believe it. If you haven't already, hitting that like or subscribe button will make sure that the YouTube algorithm is happy, and as a result, you'll be much more likely to see my nonsense in the future. Going the extra step and becoming a channel member or supporting on Ko-fi will go a long way to make sure I can keep this project going. I really appreciate it and the opportunity to do my part to support BattleTech. With that, I'll say have an awesome week. Please stay positive, go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.